Hey, Dave Hodges here, host of the Common Sense Show. How's your 4th of July been? If you're listening to me on the East Coast, after the release of this, your fireworks that you didn't get to see have already come and gone and went and were never happened anyway. It's estimated about 120 million Americans will be deprived of their 4th of July viewing of our country's independence as evidenced by fireworks displays, which reference back to Fort McHenry and its stand against British tyranny in the War of 1812, in which we persevered. Now, let's get down to business here. Major news story, red alert, Taiwan surrounded. Nowhere in the American media do you find this, and I mean nowhere do you see this. We have a report here, an English news translation report from the country of India, where Trump has already dispatched 10,000 soldiers distributed from Europe to India to stand in opposition to the Chinese incursions across the border into India. Well, the Chinese have done a lot more now. Listen to this report here as we cue this up.
And the big story that we're tracking today is the U.S. sending 2 aircraft carriers into one of Asia's hottest spots to deliver a pointed message to China that it does not appreciate Beijing's military ramp-up in the region. The USS Nimitz and USS Ronald Reagan are conducting dual carrier operations and exercises in South China Sea in a bid to support free and open Indo-Pacific region. The naval exercise comes amidst the bitter border dispute between India and China that has been going on for months in the Ladakh region. The US had earlier moved its troops from Europe to bolster support towards other nations in Asian region, including India, against the Chinese military advances.
There'll be other places. I just talked about the threat from the Chinese Communist Party. So now threats to India, threats to Vietnam, threats to Malaysia, Indonesia, South China Sea challenges, the Philippines. We're going to make sure we're postured appropriately to counter the PLA. We think that's the challenge of our time, and we're going to make sure we have resources in place to do that. To the extent that that change, the difference in what the United States decides to do, impacts adversely a threat someplace, it may be that other nations need to step up.
Geeta Mohan is reporting from Delhi. Gaurav Sawant also reporting from Delhi. First up to you, Geeta, who's our foreign affairs editor. Geeta, ever since the outbreak of coronavirus, China and US have been in a deadlock with each other.
Okay, you get the idea. I hope that translation came through, because certainly the reporter had a pretty heavy Indian accent, which might have made it a little more difficult to hear. But to sum up what you just heard, they noted the fact that 10,000 troops were repositioned from Europe to India. I thought Trump was bringing them home here to face domestic violence and the ongoing threat to American cities, but no, he sees a bigger picture here. World War III takes precedent over everything else, and that's why he put the 10,000 troops in India to counter the Chinese incursions across the border. So he's like, if you want to attack the Indians, you're going to have to go through us to do it. But also, too, you heard that the Nimitz is spearheading a 2-carrier task force to move to Taiwan, where the Chinese have encircled Taiwan. Now, here's what's interesting. Let's get the report now from the American mainstream media. Funny, I don't hear anything. There's nothing being reported. Why do we have to go to India to get this story? But by the way, too, I have a contact in Taiwan, personal, family related. Haven't heard anything there either yet, but I expect to by tomorrow morning. I have another friend who has Taiwan connections, and he's all over this story. He told me unequivocally 45 minutes ago, Dave, you can go with this story. It is true. We are on full military alert in Taiwan. Are the Chinese going to make their move? I thought they were trying to draw us into India, and I said that earlier. I did say they're trying to draw us in. I told you also, too, that President Trump unequivocally has been told that if you want to keep your job, you're going to start a war with China. And that's from not the Joint Chiefs, but the people who own the Joint Chiefs, the military-industrial complex. They want that war with China. And it looks like China's all too willing to oblige. Now, is this blustering? I'm not sure. But there's a lot going on right now in that theater. And you also heard the newscaster say that India and Taiwan are not the only nations that are in trouble. They mentioned Vietnam, Malaysia. They went through a whole series of places there near the South China Sea. My goodness, the Chinese are really ramping things up. Are they trying to provoke an incident? Do they want a fake Gulf of Tonkin incident? False flag incident? It's really interesting what's going on in that portion of the world, but like I said, if you want news on South Africa, don't depend on the American media. You go to the African media, and I learned that courtesy of Pastor Aubrey Brocken, who relocated from South Africa under duress to New Zealand, and he's pointing me to a lot of great stories about, the Chinese militarizing Africa. That's right. And they're also militarizing South America, thanks to expats that stay in contact with me there. And now they're threatening Taiwan. I would say they're getting ready to make their move on multiple fronts. Now, let me share with you what else I know. It came to my attention, Paul Preston and I talked about this, I believe, about 60 days ago, that the selective service boards were instructed to make sure everything is up to speed. Well, why would you tell the selective service boards that? Well, you're planning on having a draft. And if you've noticed, the military is really upping their recruitment. I mean, like no one's business. We are headed for a draft. What you parents are going to have to decide, are you going to give your teenage sons, early 20s, are you going to give them safe haven? Or are you going to subject them to the next war of unification for the globalists, a war that will benefit the bankers and kill millions on each side? You have to decide if you're willing to sacrifice your kids for the bankers. That's ultimately what this comes down to. If Trump doesn't give them the war, surely the Democrats turned Bolsheviks will if they win the election. And you're saying, well, Dave, that sounds like an unfounded statement. How can you say that? Well, let's go back to debate number 2, shall we? Debate number 2, where Hillary Clinton was asked about her policy on Syria. And she was really, really clear. She said, if I'm elected, we'll create a no-fly zone, and if anybody violates that, we'll shoot them down. That would have been Russian planes being shot down by American planes. That's an immediate declaration of war. And that led Putin to say, after Trump was elected, had Hillary been elected, he would have launched a first strike against the United States. And that is no secret. That story ran through Europe and intermittently, minorly ran here in America. You know, it's funny. I talk to a lot of people who travel around the world, and they stay in contact with me by email and Skype and so forth. You know what they tell me repeatedly? You don't realize how controlled your American media is until you travel outside the country. And you hear things about America like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that was going on in my own country. But that's actually the case here. Now, shall we get down to some more substantial facts here? Substantial facts, I should say. I'm getting it on very good authority from multiple eyewitnesses, multiple people, some involved, some family members involved, about redeployment of many troops around the country away from training bases to operational bases, which means something could be ready to happen. But I will say this too. When you sail 2-carrier task force into a place where there's already a big chance for conflict, I think the die is already cast. Now, I'd like to know here, we have an audience in Australia and New Zealand. We have a lot of people who contact us. I'm putting this out to you. Are you seeing military activity? Are you all going on alert as well, too? Because if Taiwan is hit, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that Australia and New Zealand would be as well. What do you think? Well, it looks like President Xi has finally lost control of his government. I subscribe to the Paul Preston notion and what he's been told, and also I've been told the same thing in many circles, that Xi and Trump wanted to avoid war. They wanted an alliance. But whenever Xi was willing to say, let's back off a little bit on the one-sided economic relationship and trade, that China's deep state jumped right in and says, no, 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 because they want conflict, because they want the war. And the man who's leading the charge for them, as I've said before, is Wei Fang, who promised to exterminate Americans in a speech I ran in a 5-part series on thecommonsenseshow.com back in July of 2019. You might want to go check that out. This is something that I think is now bearing fruit. The Chinese are rearing their ugly heads, and the Chi-Com Party is going to come after everyone they want to with a vengeance. Now, here's the $64 million question. What's going to happen to Russia? What's going to be their role? Now, originally, and Steve Quayle and I both have been told the same thing by different sources, that the Chinese were going to occupy resources and the Russians would get to take the booty and it would be joint operations. Very possible. Very, very possible. I mean, Obama was the first president to allow Russian soldiers on American soil. I published the pictures of them at Fort Carson training with our troops, and they were Russian Spetsnaz. People told me then, oh, Dave, you're crazy. That just never happened. I was thinking, well, gee, look at the pictures. Aren't those Russian uniforms? What, you think I hired crisis actors to play the role and they let us on the base at Fort Carson to take pictures? That would have been 2011. And the 2011 is when FEMA signed an agreement with the Russian Foreign Ministry to bring, I want you to hear the wording now, the first 15,000 soldiers to America. The wording was really key there in the document that I published, again, in 2012 on the Common Sense Show, Russian Foreign Ministry, okay, and FEMA, 2011, the first, F-I-R-S-T, first 15,000 Russian soldiers on American soil. And it's kind of funny. I'll tell you a little side story with this. I kept beating that drum for a couple of years pretty heavily. And eventually, the Russians got tired of hearing it. So one of their American-based groups, now they've changed their name, but they had me on their radio show. They called me like at 9:30 my time, which should have been after midnight their time. And they said, you're going to go on with our top guy tomorrow if you accept. I said, well, your top guy? He goes, oh, yeah, he's a great interviewer. And I went and looked him up, and he's kind of like the butcher behind the microphone. And I thought, oh, boy, 9:30 at night, no time to prepare. What time will the interview be? Oh, it'll start at 5 a.m. your time. And I says, oh, so no sleep for the weary, huh? What about my 8 hours? Well, do you want to do it, Mr. Hodges? Yeah, I'll do it. Prob to you, too. So I went on the air, but here's what's interesting. Their producer came on, and he says, well, unfortunately, our main interviewer got sick, and he's actually had to go to the ER. And I said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. He says, but we have the very capable, and I forget the woman's name now. They had her step up and take his place. Now, this was in the same time frame. Do you remember when Alex Jones went on CNN with Pierce Brosnan and just destroyed him over the Second Amendment? Do you remember that? That really led to Pierce losing his job because he didn't control Alex. Well, I thought, okay, that's not how I usually do interviews. And those of you who've listened to my interviews know I'm pretty calm, rational, like to have discussion, give and take, back and forth. But you know when you're being set up. And I remember I said to a confidant of mine, I just said, I think I got to take the Alex Jones approach here, and thanks, Alex, for showing me the way. So what I did is I just went, we came on, the interview was supposed to last 15 minutes. Okay, we went about 9. And we went on, she introduced me, and I just went off. You people think you can come here and do this because we got a treasonous president? You'll never be accepted on our soil. We will run you out of this country. We know you're here. Yada, 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 yada. And they were just, whoa, this poor girl. She sounded like she was almost a teenager. And she didn't know what to say. Well, what about, and I just start right in again. And I overpowered her. And this went on for 9 minutes. She goes, well, my producer says we have to cut away now. Thank you, Mr. Hodges. So later that day on their website, they published the interview, which is available at thecommonsenseshow.com. And you guys, I got to tell you, I went off. Not rudely, no swear words, didn't yell. I just didn't shut up. So they ran the interview and they referred it to as extremist Dave Hodges, blah, blah, blah. Okay. I took that title and I went back to the website and I ripped them again. And I ripped them again for the interview. I ripped them again for their false, misleading information they were putting out. And by the way, this went out pretty much everywhere. They had big station in New York, big station in Washington, D.C., and I was told they had 32 distribution points throughout Europe and Russia. So I thought, well, this is pretty cool. And I think it really pissed them off because of the fact that I reached people with a message they didn't want to hear. So then they wrote to me on the message board. And this could have been the dumbest thing they could have done. This woman wrote to me. Her name was Svetlana. I'll never forget the name. Svetlana. And she said, Mr. Hodges, it's true we're state-owned Russian media. But we don't do propaganda all the time. I mean, talk about an admission of guilt. I couldn't stop laughing. I must have called 5 of my closest friends. And I said, you're not going to believe what the Russians said to me. And I'm reading this, and we're all just rolling in laughter. So I did it again. I wrote another article. I think I had 3 altogether there, plus the interview. And the Russians never called me again. Never called me. It was called The Voice of Russia, in case you're wondering about the show. But I know they've changed their name, and I'd have to go look it up to find out who they've changed to. But then it was The Voice of Russia. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. The Russians are not your friend. Putin is not your friend. I would like to have seen Putin and Trump become allies against the globalists, against the Chinese. Because I will tell you this, when China's done with America, if they were able to defeat us in a war, they will turn on Russia. Make no mistake about it. They are the Nazi Germany of their time. They will not hold back, and they will invade Russia. But I think they'll invade Russia with nukes. A fool would invade Russia by land. You can't really take Russia by land. I mean, who's tried? Hannibal, Napoleon, and Hitler. And all 3 failed miserably. So, back to the point here. I still look for this to happen. I think we're on the cusp of something very big. But I will tell you this, if the fighting starts over there, it's not going to stay over there. Steve Quayle and I have been saying this for years. We have reliable eyewitness information and official confirmation about extreme Chinese troop buildups, not just in Mexico, but here in the inland ports. And the ones who run the solar energy farms in the West, they're all Chinese military. They belonged to a company at one time called Cinta, but that company's now changed names about 4 times, and I haven't bothered to keep up with it. But they have a huge presence in the West. Remember, this is a story that Alex Jones actually broke, that the Long Beach port was open to these people for 20 years. They ran the Long Beach port. They could have brought in untold amount of anything. And that force is here waiting to be activated. So if the fighting starts over there, don't think, hey, we got a while. It's going to be a while before they ever get over it. No. They're already here. And so are the Russians. And a lot of you, and here's what's going to happen. People are going to say, oh, Dave, take your medicine. You're paranoid. But there's going to be another group of people that write to me and say, you know, Dave, it's really funny. I go into this Chinese restaurant. This actually happened in Florida. I'll tell this story real quick here. It was about 3 years ago. And someone says, Dave, you know, I've been reading your old articles about China and Russia. And I went into this restaurant. It was run by the Chinese. Then I went in about 2 weeks later, and these were all athletic men, you know, military age and so forth. Then I went in, and then it was run by the Russians. And then, of course, there were the infamous radio stations at night that were speaking code in California. I ran that story, too. First it was in Chinese, and then it was in Russian. Might want to look that up on the search engine for thecommonsenseshow.com. I identified who the stations were, who the owners were, and the whole 9 yards. Now, that practice has been stopped, and I understand that Trump stopped it. But nonetheless, it just shows you the presence that's here. And as we prepare to move towards the inevitable, if you think you're out of bounds here and you're without being in their reach, you need to seriously realize you are wrong. Dead wrong. Now, my name's Dave Hodges. I brought you this report. This has been the Common Sense Show, and we are the show that's freeing America one enslaved mind at a time. We're brought to you by PrepareWithDave.com. The very best in storable food is the very best for you. Why? Because let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen, you don't want to go into what's happening, either domestically or with foreign issues, without a stockpile of food. Restaurant quality, 25-year shelf life, lots of diversity. Preparewithdave.com. Thanks for joining us. Please give us a thumbs up, a like on the way out. Hit that subscribe button. We'll notify you when we do something new. And share this far and wide, because if we have to go to India to get a story about what's happening, what does that tell you about the news that we all have access to? Well, not very damn good.